Hello, I'm Lloyd Helm, and I'm going to read you a story. The story is taken from a book called Train Wheels, Flying Saucers, and the Ghost of Tiburcio Vasquez. It is published by Rogue Phoenix Press, and the story is written by yours truly. Winds of the Great Mojave. The wind doesn't always blow in Southern California's Antelope Valley, but it blows often enough that most of the trees lean, having been blown sideways since they were sprouts. Very often, the wind rolls in from the nearby Mojave Desert, and when the hot, dry Mojave wind blows, it stirs speculation in romantic hearts as to where that wind comes from. Of course, there are all the scientific explanations: uneven heating of the ground, rotation of the planet, seasonal considerations, but romantic hearts know that those are only facts, not reasons. There are speculations that the winds are caused by Native American wind spirits who live in caves back in the mountains and blow when they are angry about something. That might be especially the Santa Ana winds, which blow down the canyons of the San Gabriel Mountains and scorch the Los Angeles basin, making the yearly brush fires rolling hell. Those ancient spirits are probably angry with white men who have supplanted the native peoples, who left their handprints and other marks on some of the standing stones in the Great Mojave. There are those who have left the Los Angeles basin to live in what used to be the more rural surroundings of the Antelope Valley and the Great Mojave. If you ask them, you will often hear that the winds are caused by Los Angeles sucking. And they may not be wrong, but I believe I have located the source of at least some of the winds. Back a while ago, when gasoline was cheaper than bourbon, I found myself in a little bar in the desert city of Mojave. Now, Mojave wasn't much at the time, still isn't for that matter. It is mostly a strip of gas stations, motels, and eateries along the northbound highway. But it is also the home of desert rats and dreamers who look for gold in the rocks and in outer space. It is the home of the first privately owned spaceport in the country. The bar was called the Windy City Saloon. It was owned and run by a fellow named Jimmy Mills, who was from Chicago, hence the name. The irony of the name did not escape him, nor was it lost on me as I stepped out of the wind into the dim confines of the bar. It was mid-morning, so Jimmy and I were the only ones in the place, as I seated myself at the bar and ordered a beer. "Windy, ain't it?" I said, just to get the conversation going. Jimmy was polishing glasses and didn't even look up when he said, "About like usual." I blinked at him. "Usual?" I asked. "The wind's near strong enough to lift a skinny guy right off his feet. It was rolling a 55-gallon steel drum down the middle of the street." "Empty," he said. Again I blinked at him. "Yeah, I'm pretty sure," I said with the slightest sarcastic twist in my voice. "Nothing to that. One time I was putting gasoline in my pickup truck at the Oasis General Store, and I saw this 55-gallon barrel rolling and bouncing along in the wind. It was striking sparks off the pavement, and it got just a little bit past the Oasis when it finally cracked open. One of the sparks popped and that barrel exploded, threw fire all over the street. It'd been full of kerosene. If it had blown back another 50 yards, me and the Oasis would have been barbecued." Now, a 55-gallon drum of kerosene would have to weigh in the neighborhood of 500 pounds. But I didn't figure it was polite to call a man a liar right in his own bar, so I just said, "Ah, yeah," and sipped at my beer a little bit. About that time, another fellow blew in, and the door in the cloud of dust. He was an older fellow that would have fit into the desert rat category. He was dressed in stained jeans, cowboy shirt, and a wind-defying Stetson that looked older than me. Jimmy greeted him with, "Hey, Clyde," and started drawing a beer without being told. Clyde sat down at the bar with one stool between us and tipped his hat back. Jimmy set the beer glass in front of him and waited while he took a first sip before he said, "I just told this fella here about that drum of kerosene that blew away and exploded. I don't think he believes me." Clyde glanced at me out of the corner of his eye, then shook his head. "I ain't surprised. Hard to believe if you ain't seen how the wind can blow out here. Why, just the other day, I was driving down toward Rosamond when a half a hide of bricks blew across the road right in front of me." I laughed. "Why, Mr. Clyde, you wouldn't fib to a poor pilgrim, would you?" He turned full face to me, looking serious and offended. "Couple even hit the side of the truck. Made big old dents. I'm lucky one of them didn't hit the windshield. It would have probably killed me. You want to come out and have a look?" "No, no, no," I shook my head and raised my hands, palms out. "Sorry if I offended. I didn't mean to doubt you." "Huh," he snorted and went back to sipping his beer. "You know," I began, trying to smooth over my faux pas, "I have heard the reason that there are no antelopes in the Antelope Valley is because the wind blew them all over into Purdue County." Jimmy snorted and asked if I wanted another beer. As he was drawing it, another cowboy desert rat looking guy came in and brought the smell of sweated leather and horse manure with him. He was a long, raw-boned individual that looked like he spent a lot of time out in the sun. Once again, Jimmy drew a beer and set it down in front of the man without being told, then said, "Charles, this fella thinks that this little breeze is a real wind. Can you imagine that?" Charles looked over at me with barely restrained contempt. "Why, this ain't even an anvil wind," he said. I should have kept my mouth shut. I knew it, but maybe it was my second beer that caused me to say, "Anvil wind?" Yep. I should have left it alone, but my mouth was suddenly leading a life all its own, and I asked, "What's an anvil wind?" He sipped his beer and said, "Well, you see, most times a horse that has been what they call drop trained, that means that they've been trained to stand when you drop their reins on the ground. Most time, they just stand like they've been trained. Out here, the wind picks up the reins and makes the horse think he's being led, and he can wander off to Lord knows where. A lot of places put out weights to tie the reins to. Little breezes like this blowing now, that weights are nothing. But if the wind gets up, them little weights just blow out straight the end of the reins and the horse wanders. So some folks put out anvils to tie the horse's reins to. But I seen the wind so high one time, I picked up the anvil and led the horse off." I contemptuously finished the story for him. He looked at me and with disgust in his voice and a perfectly straight face said, "Didn't pick up the anvil, but it was scooting it along the ground. I followed the track it left to find the horse." I shook my head, took another sip of beer, trying to wash the story out of my mind. While Charles was telling his story, another man had come in. He was about my age, dressed in striped coveralls. He had a sweat-stained red bandana tied around his neck and was wearing what I always thought of as a train engineer's cap. "Cheeseburger and a beer, Jimmy," he said. Jimmy spoke through the little window behind the bar to the cook in the back and drew the tap beer. The man sipped at the beer and listened to Charles finish his story and nodded, "Yep, I seen it that windy a lot of times," he volunteered. "But the worst I ever saw was when the wind caused Edwards Air Force Base to scramble fighter jets because they thought flying saucers were landing." Once more, I just could not help myself. I asked, "How's that?" "Well, see, I work just the other side of the tracks, over where they make train wheels. Now, them wheels are nigh as tall as me and heavy as hell, near a ton each. When we finish the wheels, before we put them on the axles and ship them, we put the wheels out in the big yard by the tracks. So one time we had a big contract with maybe 100 wheels laying out there when this big wind come up. tore up houses, all kinds of things. Worst of all, it picked up a bunch of them train wheels and flung them like frisbees right over the mountain and across the dry lake bed at Edwards. They showed up on radar over there, and since the space shuttle lands there and Edwards does so much testing of new airplanes, some of them real secret, they thought they were being attacked by flying saucers. They scrambled fighter jets and shot down 3 train wheels before they discovered what they were. I glanced at Jimmy and then at the other 3 unsmiling men at the bar. I'd had enough. I stood up, dug $10 out of my pocket, threw it on the bar. "Keep the change, Jimmy," I said, and made my way out into the breeze. Many people think that the winds of the Great Mojave come from the uneven heating of the planet or the suction of Los Angeles sprawl, but I think they come from the ancient wind spirits, and those spirits dwell in a little bar called the Windy City Saloon. The end.